Oh. So interesting to field CTO at Monte Carlo Data. They're obviously data observability company that's becoming great these days with startups like source frameworks like Great Expectations and stuff like that. So that's really cool. You might even tell us a little bit about what they think CTO does. It's very attractive. You but also it used to be the head of data at New York Times, which I think the best name of that. So I think this probably got some really interesting stories as to what he got up to there. So I think that's going to be amazing. Really appreciate the fact that you've as a recent time for us to share your story. But just as we're finishing up here, I guess we've had Rich Slides, conference, and we've had lots of wonderful meetups this year, and it couldn't have happened without our amazing sponsors, including Microsoft Reactor, who are hosting the meetup today. So a big round of applause. Thanks, Simon. All of our amazing sponsors here that have supported us in a massive way throughout the year. Implies here from Snowflake, you got some real cool work. So you've got some really impressive sponsors that have helped us out a lot. So just wanted to acknowledge their amazing contribution this year. But Phil, I know this is out of the way. We'll probably set this stuff back towards the end of January, maybe start next year. So stay tuned for that. And Shane, thanks so much. Round of applause. Nice to meet everyone, and thanks to you for hosting and also, I'd say, happy to take questions throughout the experience, answer them, or at the end, talk to you about the new opportunity as well as what we're doing with Monte Carlo. so I'm the CTO of Monte Carlo. Just in terms of that job title or means, I'm not the CTO. We had a CTO who's one of our founders, Fish, who founded Moses. The field CTO is a role that we've started to see more of in software companies. And really, the role I play is going out and talking to both chief data officers, VPs of data, CTOs, about their data strategy, what they're trying to achieve, and how we can enable or accelerate that. And I do that based on the role I play at New York Times, where I play data. I led a team. I came to lead a team of about 10, and left leading a team of 160. So we had pretty massive growth in the data team during that time. And I was actually an early adopter of and then effectively, what Monte Carlo does and how we start to solve the problem of reliability. Okay, so testing. I arrived to lead a team of 12, and for about 6 times in 8 years, so 9 years I was there. Moving from what was essentially a centralized model to once you get to a certain size in team. Once you get to a certain size in team, you have to start to think about strategically decentralizing that team across the org. Many of you may be familiar with the Spotify org model, which was, I think, the shift we made in about 2018, shifting from very department-aligned teams to a mode of cross-functional product development. And so I effectively deployed analytics teams across these kind of vertical, what we called missions. I think in the Spotify language, they're squads or maybe tribes. And really that was kind of analytical and data science talent deployed across the organization. And then I also ran, so that was kind of the function of data. And then I also ran what we called the data platform mission. And that was building out data product management as a skill. That was all of the data engineering talent in the org, also some software engineering talent in there. And really building out the core data assets for the organization, the modes of access to data for users, and also housing kind of the machine learning teams and platform in supporting the business. Okay, so the journey we took in the time I was there, I'll just start off. I think the first week I arrived, someone on my team said, we wouldn't have known through our data systems that the plane had landed in the Hudson. If you all remember that plane landing in the Hudson, because our site traffic analytics couldn't keep up with the scale we were seeing.
And if you're the New York Times, every 2 years you face an election. Every 100 or so years you face something like COVID, and your traffic just goes through the roof. And so we were having real challenges with scaling, basic counting for the organization. We had this legacy stack. A lot of you may be familiar with at this time. There was a lot of investment in Hadoop. We were playing around with Cloudera Hadoop, I believe. We had some Oracle data warehouses managing our customer data. And then we had a bunch of sort of siloed vendor analytics platforms. And there was a technical, a CTO-led decision at the time to actually build out on-premise Hadoop for the organization. Not something I was asking for, but it's something they decided to build. And instead, what I focused on was kind of solving, at the time, we were mostly a print company, mostly an advertising company. And the shift was towards this digital subscription model that you now see in most media companies. I think we had about 500,000 digital subscribers at the time, but we had no way to run reliable experiments. And so this was one of the first projects I took on with a cross-functional kind of tiger team, was how do we build out an experimentation platform that sits natively on our data. At the time, it was somewhere between Redshift, Hadoop, but sits natively on the data and integrates with we integrated with Fastly, we integrated client side, and we had a bunch of sort of server side integrations that met the needs of 60 or so product teams across the org. So that was an early kind of investment in driving towards more customer-centric data models. And then I'd say the biggest shift from this legacy was this kind of transformation stage for data, where my analytics team that was now about 25 came together with a data science and a data engineering team and combined on this roadmap to move everything over to GCP. So we're actually an early adopter of BigQuery and the broader GCP platform. Basically in the space of a few months, moved off of this Hadoop setup and onto a GCP infrastructure. We did that with a bunch of tiger teams, so merging with engineering, re-platforming subscriber data, re-platforming a lot of our analytics and event data, and then also building out kind of light scheduling tools for analysts and business intelligence that hadn't really been in place at scale. I'd say that was the sort of most pivotal shift we took in that time, just in terms of, and many of you may be familiar, but the shift to kind of cloud was kind of unlocked just huge benefits in terms of productivity, reliability of the SQL. No longer were we looking at sort of 3-hour queries of Hadoop that failed with a pretty obscure error message. We were running queries in seconds. Just enabled us to take on projects that weren't otherwise possible. At that point, I started to form the platform teams, hired or brought across from analytics our first kind of data product manager. And today that data product team is about 10 people and works across the platform stack. And then, as I mentioned, in 2018, actually decentralized the analytics group into these kind of cross-functional missions because we had kind of sufficient maturity in our tooling to be able to do that. Sure.
So you go from your central data team and then you sort of distribute your people to many areas, or it was something like you are people saying, where's the data people in the New York Times, and then you start sort of talking to them?
So I had the data team was all under my org, and essentially what I did was deploy VPs or senior directors of analytics into each of these groups with a team of about 10 to 15. So we were getting to, or early on, it probably wasn't that big, but grew into that sort of team size. And then they would work with product leadership, engineering leadership, design leadership within those missions. So let's take the subscription growth mission. They would be part of the leadership team and figure out then how to deploy that team across product teams. And usually there were somewhere between sort of 10 and 15 product teams. But they would also have to consider, I think part of the challenge with that is if you deploy all your analysts to the product teams, no one's actually doing the sort of high impact cross-team analytics work. And so it was up to that VP to be able to kind of pull them back. And then I actually maintained some analysts in the data platform group to also handle some enterprise capabilities. And then I'd say transformation, the next phase is probably just transformation continued, but I think of it as scaling. So partly what we did was we had data scientists that were deployed in teams like personalization and others across the building. I think what I found with that was that it's very hard to actually build up capabilities when you have single data scientists deployed in cross-functional product teams. So we brought them back into the platform group, established 3 machine learning teams against long-run business problems led by a data scientist. So one of those was content recommendations. One of those was the dynamic paywall, the subscription paywall for the Times, which is now run algorithmically. And one of them was driven towards advertising segmentation. And so those were data scientists and machine learning engineering teams that worked on a long-run business problem and could start building out the underlying capabilities like a feature store and other pieces of the puzzle to just support machine learning at scale. Last couple of things I'll mention. We kicked off a privacy strategy. So we basically removed a lot of the marketing pixels and advertising header bidders and all this third-party stuff from the site as a strategic push to say the Times was going to be the sole controller of our users' data, right? So really a first-party data strategy pushed with a privacy positioning that was defensible to our readers, to our subscribers. And the side benefit of that, you end up removing a lot of the pixels and junk that slows down the site and that siphons off your data into other vendors. I also then said, all right, we have a governance team that's kind of conquering privacy. How can we take the same approach to standards and quality? And so that's when we established this kind of quality and trust program in aid of kind of scaling across the business in, I'd say, like a data meshy fashion. I don't think we were data mesh by the book, but certainly using sort of data as a product principles, leading teams with data product managers, and pushing our data platform towards a self-service infrastructure for the company. This is roughly how I think of the construction of the data platform group, both in terms of broader squads. There were multiple teams within each layer here, but in terms of the broader squads and what we were trying to solve. So at the base level, we had the data management infrastructure, consistent self-service infrastructure that enforces standards. Quite honestly, we had 6 different ETL tools that we used depending on the time a certain data asset was created. And so really it was about setting kind of golden pathways, like what's the position going forward that will enable us to migrate everything to a single approach and start to sunset some of these old technologies. The second layer up was really the data enrichment, the core data products or domain data sets or domain data products. Many of these were managed centrally in the platform. And then, as I mentioned, we were kind of pushing towards a meshy approach that had domain teams outside of the platform group taking full ownership of data sets. And then above that, the kind of user access layer, so democratizing this trusted data to all teams and users. And then, it doesn't fit as neatly within the data platform, but was the right place to house it, is the machine learning applications. Very specific to a business problem, but required sort of centralized leadership and ongoing investment to build out both the platform capabilities and invest in the algorithms. Across that, of course, we have privacy, quality, and standards. So that's where we began investing in tools like Monte Carlo. Okay, so the ambition and result, I'd say, our ambition was to have fast, reliable SQL a join away. So any data set should be easily joinable for analysts. An approach to BI that enabled speed. A CDP, so we invested in a CDP that sat on top of the stack to give sort of marketing operation access to the data. Flexible experimentation. These machine learning teams focused on content recommendations, dynamic paywall targeting, and ad segmentation, and then standards and tools. Rather than heavy governance bodies, we're really looking to federate standards across the organization. Okay, so what are the challenges? And this is kind of where we get into Monte Carlo, but data downtime is something that people are pretty familiar with, I think, by now. Often kind of really well known within the data team and kind of not understood or not well known outside, but periods of time when your data is partial, erroneous, missing, or inaccurate. I found early on someone asked me, is the data wrong, Shane? And my answer to them was kind of well, of course it is, but it's always wrong, right? There's always aspects of the data that will be wrong. It's kind of how you manage that, how you communicate it, what expectations you set around how accurate it is. The problem was that this gets worse over time. And this on the right is just a generic data mesh diagram, but similar to what we had, where we had kind of core, cross-domain data managed centrally. We had data producing teams upstream that really didn't understand what data was being used for downstream. So they were kind of blind producers of data. And then we had the consuming teams that were kind of responsible for data quality, but couldn't see upstream at all. And I speak to in this field CTO role, I've spoken to about 150 data leaders over the past 5 months. And I remember one leader saying, I asked him how he sort of measures this idea of downtime, and he said it's days since last incident that my CEO found out about, kind of thing. And so this diagram is kind of pretty accurate to how data teams think about this problem in many orgs. The other kind of angle to this is just the consequences, right? Early on, if you can detect the issue, then it's a data engineering problem. You maybe lose a bit of time resolving it. The consequences are minimal. It's time lost. As it gets out to business stakeholders, I had a data product that went to 2,000 journalists in the newsroom, and they would jump on Slack, each of them intent on seeing the audience to their stories. And that's what it did. It provided this kind of custom UI that showed them who was reading their stories in aggregate, of course. And they would ping us on Slack and say the data looks wrong, right? And this is probably the most common thing, is you just start to lose stakeholder trust, whether that's internal consumers, external consumers of your data, or executives. Sorry, I just realized I say data now, not data. I've been in the US too long. And then going up the chain, you might lose revenue. So that's when it really reaches external customers. And then you can think of the last stretch is, maybe it's a violation of your 10Q, your quarterly reporting that goes to the street, or the media uncovers something in your data, and that's really just the loss of reputation. So we find from our customer base about 70 high severity incidents every year per 1,000 tables. This, data teams aren't yet sort of meeting the uptime that you'd expect in, say, a systems engineering team or an application engineering team, where they're looking at 3 nines of reliability. We find, and this is kind of astonishing, but 30 to 50% of engineering time is spent on fire drills and managing bad data. And then it can have this sort of huge cost across the business. So back to sort of my experience at the Times, we were trying to solve for this in-house. And I think many engineering teams start by looking at how you can solve this problem with manual tests. Peter mentioned Great Expectations. So we were using Great Expectations to manage pipeline quality within the engineering team. We also built a tool within our analytics team called Snitch. And Snitch's job was to set expectations on business metrics and then report back or alert us if those expectations deviated, or the reality deviated from expectations. The problem with this is we just couldn't scale it, right? You're tackling known data problems. You're tackling it usually at an endpoint in the pipeline or some moment in the pipeline. And what we find is you're missing about 90% of data incidents. The other point here, just that fourth bullet, the data stack is constantly changing. So, and the data itself. So we had 60 product teams who were constantly rolling out new features, changing the actual data that was hitting our environment. And then we had analysts, 2 weeks later, finding an issue, spending 2 weeks to sort of diagnose it, and then chasing it back upstream.
I was wondering, could you give us a specific example of how things went wrong and was affected by it?
Yeah. Yes, sure. So the question was, can I give an example of where things went wrong and who was affected? I'd say the most common and sort of high risk challenge for us, and thankfully it never resulted in reputational risk, but our team produced the financial reporting for the company. And so one of those data products in the platform was what we called the digital subscriber system of record. It took data from upstream print and digital commerce systems, massaged that into a subscriber level data set, and then had a bunch of business rules applied to produce financial reporting, as well as be used for kind of operational analytics and even, targeting. So it was a multi-purpose financial system in a way. And invariably what would happen was the commerce teams would make a change that affected the schema or affected the amount of data coming through. And we would notice too late and often be scrambling at the end of quarter to make sure our reporting was accurate. And this is probably one of the most common problems I see across teams. And so that was immediately a use case where we needed to be alerted whenever schema changes or freshness issues or volume issues occurred, because you have this kind of need for that data to be accurate to the penny of the general ledger, and also it had to be available at kind of 6 a.m. every day.
Regarding that 90%, so what's the estimated percentage of the data quality issue in logic issue and the data quality issue itself? So I think the logic issue is you can expect 2 years for and waiting time. When you get your customer data and the customer is 2 years old, and that could be a logic issue. And the quality issue means you have female, male, and then you get another different gender type, whatever one or less. That could be a quality issue. I mean, is that 90%? What's the percentage?
Yeah, so the question was, how does that 90% break down, basically? What we sort of break it down in a different way in our solution, which we can actually solve for about 70% of the incidents with out-of-the-box machine learning-based detection on freshness, volume, and schema. So if you think of that, that's like how reliable are the pipes? And then about another 20% we solve with opt-in sort of distribution and quality checks. So the null rate, the median, the mean, and the sort of distribution of the data, as well as are we seeing sort of uniqueness in the IDs? So all those checks on distribution and quality that we can automate. And then about 10% of the incidents, these are probably some of the most critical, but about 10% we deal with through manual kind of SQL rules, which is really your business logic, right? Does it match to the general ledger? That's like a rules-based check. So that's about how we see it break down. So, the Monte Carlo perspective on this, the good news is that all these kind of data downtime issues have a pretty common thread. And our founders, Bar and Lior, before they built the product, were out talking to data teams and data engineers and found that they could essentially solve for it by looking at freshness, distribution, volume, schema, and critically, I'd say lineage, which sits a bit differently, but it's critical to kind of diagnosing, troubleshooting, and resolving the issues, doing root cause analysis. And so this is really the kind of framework that Monte Carlo is built around, is these 5 pillars. This is kind of what I just walked through, but we basically start, so Monte Carlo gets deployed within sort of 20 minutes, starts collecting metadata logs, and is integrated across your modern data stack. And straight away, we start learning kind of the cadence of how fresh each data set is. Is it arriving at 9 a.m.? Is it arriving every 10 minutes? Is it once per week? That sort of thing. What volume should you expect in data? And of course, any schema changes, whether it's adding to the schema, modifying it, deleting it, this sort of thing. And so that all starts learning, and within 2 weeks, customers start to get these alerts. And then I mentioned this sort of second layer, which is kind of opt-in machine learning-based monitors. What's the percentage null, median, and there's some 20 plus metrics within that. And then finally, the custom rules. So that goes on your warehouse and lake. And then, of course, we're integrated into tools like dbt, Airflow, as well as business intelligence tools to be able to bring in those logs and contribute to the lineage and help to resolve issues faster.
How Monte Carlo knows, SQL there, Oracle there, all the platforms that we're using. And also the third step is that customize that with business people to know the custom rules.
Yeah, so the first question, we don't integrate with Oracle. We tend to start at the kind of modern data stack, and over time, we're a 3-year-old company, so over time we may stretch more into that data producing stack, if that's Postgres or other environments. But basically, we're at the point of the ingestion into the data lake or the data warehouse, tools like Fivetran. The second question, so how do we manage alerting across teams? Is that
more the third step? I am understanding that you apply some custom rules, quality checks.
Yeah.
Right? I imagine that custom rules comes from the business side.
Yeah.
So
This can depend on the kind of data team. So sometimes the analysts, the kind of domain specialist analysts, might be within the data group. In my case at the New York Times, they were under my roof, but they were deployed across the business. But sometimes in like a larger company, we're dealing with some massive enterprises. You might find that then you're going into some business unit who has their own analytics team, who you're engaging to sort of develop those really specific rules around business logic. But typically what we do is land within a data platform or data engineering group, and there you're just getting the value immediately out of the box. You might not be as close to the business. This is the stack I mentioned. We integrate across, and really the beauty of it is getting lineage across this stack. You can have data producers see kind of the blast radius downstream, how many reports, how many consumers are affected by an issue. And you can also have these sort of deployed business analysts look upstream and see, all right, if I've got a specific data incident, where was the source? How far do I need to go back up the pipeline to resolve this issue?
I'm surprised to see your data catalog as category there. So are you providing your own, or is that like a strategic thing?
Good question. Yeah. So I'd say we have like discovery light. So if it's data discovery within the data team that you're interested in solving, there's some native catalog features in Monte Carlo that provide that. And really it's lifting up, it's Snowflake, lifting up some of that metadata, allowing you to search across your data, see the incidents within those, any XLOs you might be creating. We also integrate with catalog. So if you have an election or a plan or a Calibra or whatever it is, the platform has essentially got APIs into all this data, so you can be doing that, and we have some native integration with those as well. So I think it's just data discovery within the data team. You've got everything you need. If you're going beyond that and you're trying to make a data catalog accessible to the business, then you're probably looking at one of those other solutions. Okay, and this is the critical part of observability that kind of goes beyond what I think of as kind of old school mindset to data quality, which was we're going to produce a bunch of BI reports that tell you about accuracy and timeliness of data, is actually putting the tools in the hands of the people that have data problems to solve it. And so lineage is just one of the critical features in terms of looking upstream and downstream at the problem space. We allow teams to triage incidents, to manage workflows. So we might integrate with your incident management solution. And then we have some of this kind of automated machine learning driven root cause analysis. Right? And so we'll identify correlations in the data that could lead you to solving it, or other issues that we see, such as like a change in Fivetran or in Airflow that we can pick up. So there's a bunch of automated alerts there that look at kind of coincident events that might point us to the problem and have you resolve the issue faster. And I just say from like a goals perspective, often what we're aligning with engineering teams on early on is like, how can we reduce the time to detect issues and the time to resolve issues? Because that's what we want to be measured on, right? That's how reliable you are as an engineering group. This is actually a dashboard product we released recently, and kind of how on the left is how I think of the stages that teams go through. Often the kind of first 6 months or year is actually building operational muscle. Might be like on-call rotations, of be reviewing incidents each week to understand what you can systematically solve for. Then secondly, going into establishing service levels. So I'd say some of our more leading customers are looking across all of their data to define SLOs, to set expectations, communicate them, and resolve issues faster. And then thirdly, and this is more the data mesh angle, but once you've created those service levels, how do you federate them across an organization, which is both a technology problem, but also a skills and people challenge sometimes. And just, I guess, coming back to, what we achieved in a short time at the New York Times, and how observability can scale. So we had out-of-the-box coverage on 250,000 tables in BigQuery. We leveraged Monte Carlo then initially in the platform group, but ultimately across 15 cross-functional teams. We had domain kind of oriented ownership on engagement, response, and uptime. We had routing of alerts out to 18 different destinations, and adoption across data engineers, data science, analytics teams. So what you're looking for at the end of the day is, first, how do you make your engineering group more productive so you're saving engineering hours, fewer major incidents that you have to report back, and increased uptime and increased trust ultimately. And so for me, it was, how do we enable data access across the business that's trusted? And so this was a key part of that solution. Okay. Thank you.
Real quick, I know a few of you asked some really good questions during the talk, but we've got, because it is Christmas time, we've got a copy of the Data Mesh book, which was mentioned a few times by Shane. So, yeah, ask your questions away, whatever you might end up with in this.
You have to see last one. To the data quality issues. How many of you started data using systems? How many of you started
I think back to what I said about 70%, like I'd say 70% are those upstream issues, which are freshness, volume, and schema. And those are predominantly coming from changes to the upstream systems. And so, you probably there's a lot of talk now about where you can institute data contracts with data producing teams. I think like that's maybe possible where you have pretty static data objects, but would have been really hard for us on like the event data at the times. I would say it might be 70%, but it's probably not. It might not be the most valuable 70%. So like the real major issues might come in a business logic change as opposed to one of those issues. Yeah.
follow-up question? All of these sort of data quality dashboards and observability dashboards and the processes from that who's sort of the best recipient of these messages and these actions and the responsibility to do something?
Yeah, I look at this dashboard as ultimately, I think the owner of these metrics are the data engineering teams, whether that's a centralized group, right, who are owning the kind of time to detection, time to resolution, and actually owning the incidents. What I looked at as a leader and what I find a lot of sort of VPs of data or leadership people are looking at these kind of domain breakdowns, because if they're federating ownership across teams in what works in a data mesh, they're looking at how accountable, pushing out accountability, and that means these teams are actually holding up their end of the bargain. So I found in talking to data leaders that domain breakdown is one of the most key ones. They can see who this is working for and who's kind of not meeting the expectations. But what I found is you actually want the data engineering team or the data governance team, the product manager, to take ownership over the metrics. And a lot of these metrics are new to data teams, so it'll take a while to take hold.
It's kind of related to that question as well, and data governance just touched on. How about security incidents in terms of specifically attribute-based access control on columns?
Yeah.
Like, how do you track lineage of columns and then go, or this should not be published, and got published out this way? Like, there is no security.
Yeah, so we're not, I can just say, honestly, we're not taking on the security problem right now, at least. We do like in the catalog features, like if you label PI columns in Snowflake, then we can surface that as part of the catalog. We're not handling access management. That would be like you're a user or a different platform, and we're not really handling the like. We're going to provide you the view of your entire data environment and the flows around that. It's, lineage for us is with the purpose of solving data quality issues. May change in the future. Yeah.
Just on the data freshness. So we've got a very rudimentary data freshness checker on all our data. But with today's like modern web of like systems where the data is passing from one system to the next, when it lands in the lake, the data might be updated every single day. So it might look like it's fresh, but if one of those upstream systems which you can't see, there's no observability on it, that breaks, and it still passes data through the other systems, and so you're still getting that data dumped into your data lake. So would Monte Carlo natively detect the data is the exact same from yesterday? Maybe that's a red flag, if you see it changing every other day. Or would it rely on that metadata of it was updated today, so it is fresh?
And so in this example, what's the data problem?
So the problem is that the data is getting updated every day, but the data should be changing every day. What's actually happened is a very far upstream system has kind of like broken, and the intermediate systems that aggregate our data is still passing on, but the data is actually stale. So it's a complicated data freshness problem. So our rudimentary data freshness checks, which just check the metadata saying, yes, it was updated, it was written to today, it was all written today, so it's all fresh, and it was wrong. And that was something that we saw in our production environment, it was quite a big issue for us. Would Monte Carlo natively solve that, or would you have to add custom logic to be able to cater for something like that?
Yeah, so there's a series, and I'd have to like get one of our solution architects maybe, but there's a series of rules that you can create that are not out of the box in the same way the freshness monitors are, but they're kind of templatized, and they might be more specific like freshness issues that customers have found. So we just released a feature where you can use kind of templatized rule-based alerts, custom monitors to manage things like that. But, often I find we're learning with our customers around what their data issues are. And if it's something we expect will be valuable across more customers, then our product team adds it. Like I think one of the great things about Monte Carlo is how reactive our product team is to the data issues our customers are facing. Yeah, I don't know that one specifically.
Question. I have a question. So with 250,000 tables, how did you have observability on who's accessing what from an individual's account or from a service account?
I'm not sure I'm going to be able to answer that question, but that might be too in the weeds for what I can answer. Generally we'll work with customers, and we can separate service accounts. I know we've done that for customers. So based on the underlying metadata, we'll be able to say, all right, here are user-based issues and here are service accounts. But I think we'd have to take that offline. I'm happy to take that back to the team.
Yes, our problem is we have a data platform, but once people pull from it, they create a pseudo data platform, and then that becomes a source of truth. So
Right.
It's just the ubiquitous problem of the industry.
Yeah.
When do we have customers ready for Monte Carlo? Just what scale are you?
Yeah, well, I'd say if you're having some of these critical data incidents, then you're probably ready. Essentially, I would say if you've put in place manual checks yourself and finding that you're not able to scale to the size of your data environment, the rate of change of the data environment, I think for me, it's often more the rate of change than the overall size. But, we work with data teams that are kind of 5 people up to 500. So, if data is a big enough cause for, loss of trust or loss of revenue, then you should be looking
observability.
Stuff back there.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask about your times where you started with like was a legacy system and with that transformation way where with the like a newer platform the company itself was going through that Spotify model changes and then eventually you moved into the data machine part once I guess those foundations were established. If you were company today where like Spotify models already in place, data machines already a concept that's out there, do you think you'll start with that centralized approach initially then move towards data mesh, or is data mesh something you can pick up from the start?
I would probably hold on to centralized as long as I could. Mostly because we could prioritize the most impactful work as a centralized team. And when I actually host a lot of roundtables with data leaders, and one of the problems I hear is they've decentralized ahead of maturity, both of the team and of the toolkit, right? And data analytics, I even think like when we decentralized, we had the tools for them to be autonomous. We hadn't really created the standards. So there's a lot of duplication, a lot of low value repetitive work. And that's when I said like re-centralized machine learning and saw the benefit of just allowing them to work on the business problems, but also think about building things like feature store, other things that could scale that across the org. And so I'm a big proponent of central team and then you're really deliberately decentralizing once you have the maturity and the critical mass. Like I often hear teams going into decentralized mode when they're still quite small.
And very last, really question. I just mentioned decentralized teams. Can you mention what's
It's a challenging one. I'd say I hadn't fully handled that when I left the time. I was managing the query budget across the organization and pretty exposed to when other teams would misuse BigQuery. There is in Monte Carlo, I didn't touch on it, but there's actually insight reports our customers have found really valuable for highlighting degrading queries, unused or poor, less used data. And I found a lot of our customers are using those reports to clean up their environment and then be more active about how they kind of distribute ownership and put it up in a healthy way. But I think, I certainly face the growing costs of BigQuery. It's pretty hard to get a handle on. I from customers on that, but some of it is just kind of cleaning up and restarting some of that.
Awesome. Very great. Yeah. Yes. Last. Just want to know based on the 5 indicators that I think you see people in this so what about
we've done a big mobilization for RFPs or RFIs. We really looked at and compared speed and reliability across cloud providers at the time. This is 2016, so Snowflake hadn't really gained a foothold yet. So it was BigQuery, Redshift, and we were comparing it to what we had set up with Hadoop. And I'd say, BigQuery and Redshift had similar performance at the time, but we were seeing better partnership from Google and as an early customer, we got a lot of senior level partnership to kind of build out the platform. I think especially with those cloud providers, Snowflake seems a bit easier, but you need a partner that can guide you through their offerings that have acquired so many pieces of the stack.
Applause for Shannon. I definitely think that data observability is becoming definitely a hot topic, and judging by all the questions, we really appreciate you talk today. So hopefully we'll see you again sometime soon.
Yeah.
In the near future as well.
Yeah, it's nice to meet everyone and happy to connect.
Well, enjoy your stay in Australia, and
Thank you.
awesome. I'll give you the, you can come up here and accept your amazing Data Eng book.
Is that because I
Yeah, cool. So, we'll meet again next year. We've got like a little form up on our website, dataeng.com.au, if you'd like to submit a talk. So, you don't need to be from a vendor or anyone very high up in the world in order to get a gig at the Data Eng meetup or anything like that. We're just really interested in hearing from folks that are doing some great data engineering, or coming up against some difficult challenges or something like that, and you want to talk about it. You don't need to have found any massive success. You might have just come up against a big hairy issue, and you might sort of discuss it and share what you've learned along the way with the community. So yes, we're always on the lookout for speakers. So please do feel free to put forward and talk through that form. But season's greetings. See you all next year. Thank you very much. There's some chefs that love
Yeah, welcome. Where are you?